Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. In today's video I want to talk about the Vampire Chronicles by Anne Rice. I am going to be focusing primarily on the books in today's video, but I'm going to talk about the films really quickly. The reason I'm going to do that is because I think if you say Vampire Chronicles, a lot of people will be like, no, I've never heard of that, I don't know what that is, when actually they have. It's just they know them as The Interview with the Vampire and Queen of the Damned. This is starring Stuart Townsend as Lestat, and this is Tom Cruise as Lestat, and Brad Pitt as Louis, Kirsten Dunst as Claudia. The reason that I thought now would be a good time to talk about these is because I know that there is a new series, haven't seen it, don't know if I will see it, kind of feel like I should see it because this is a world that I love, but I can already tell from looking at like the trailer for it that things must have been changed significantly, as the character of Claudia is clearly much older than a child, and so that makes me want to kind of not because I'm very attached to the way that the story already is. I may need to just wait, and then in like 7 years time I'll watch it and be like, why didn't I watch that sooner? That tends to be how I go through things. So these were the two movies that were made. As far as I'm aware, there are no other movies that were made. This one was made first, then Queen of the Damned. These are, although both from the same series in the sense that they are based on the Vampire Chronicles, these were not created by the same people. They are not cast by the same people. So they really have nothing to do with each other than the fact that they are both based on the Vampire Chronicles, and they have gone in the correct order in the sense that Interview with the Vampire is the first, and then Queen of the Damned does come afterwards. So you may not realise that you knew what the Vampire Chronicles was, but actually maybe you do, and maybe you've just seen it in movie form. So the book series, I think it's 13 books, make up the Vampire Chronicles. It's a lot for someone, and these are not teeny tiny books. Like, they're small writing, they're chunky, and they're what I would refer to as heavy reads. Now, obviously, everyone is different. What constitutes a heavy read for me may not constitute a heavy read for you. My friend Sophie, who also loves Anne Rice, says she doesn't find them heavy at all. When I say heavy, I don't mean they're difficult to read. I mean that the pace of the books is quite slow, which I have nothing against, but it often takes us a long time sat with a certain feeling, processing a certain feeling, really getting to the depths of that feeling, which in terms of character development and us understanding characters is fantastic, but it can also be difficult for me, and I guess other people. I'm going to assume I'm not the only person that this happens to really sit in one space for a long time. I can find it much easier to read series of books where there's lots of going on and we're going all over the place and this, that and the other is happening, and the story is, reasonably steadily paced, and moving quite a lot, because it doesn't force me to sit with a particular feeling for any one too long a period of time. Whereas these books do deal quite psychologically, quite heavy psychologically, I should say, in terms of the grief and the sadness and the loneliness of what it is to be a vampire, and to what it, to what it is to understand having eternal life and leaving mortals that you can love behind. They also, in these books, really or I should say, so the vampires in these books, the blood drinkers in these books, really experience everything at a very heightened state. So, because of the length of their lives, some of the characters, thousands and thousands of years, not only are they experiencing things like love, they're experiencing these things way more than once. They're experiencing such intense love that is so much more than a mortal could kind of ever really fully grasp, that the human experience of a mortal could ever really fully understand, that it kind of takes you as a reader to a place where you're desperately trying to envisage the most intense experience of, I suppose, limerence that you could have. But for the blood drinkers, it's that times 1,000, that lasts thousands of years, that lasts the span of their lifetime. They have the ability to fall head over heels in love with multiple people at the same time. They are not limited by the bounds of humanity, by the bounds of a human experience, by the bounds and limitations of society and what's considered proper at any one particular time. When they're feeling anything, they're feeling it as such force. So when they're feeling love, it's such an intoxication of almost madness. When they're feeling sorrow, it's such a deep, deep blackness of darkness. It's poison, that, you know, it's really, really very dark. When they are injured and they need to heal, it can be for centuries that they are healing for before they are at their full force of power again. So the story itself is paced very slowly, which works. If you're somebody that doesn't like a slow paced story, maybe this won't be for you, but it does work. In my opinion, and in the opinion of many, it's absolutely fantastic. However, for me, I would rate that as a heavier read, because it means I have to be suspended in a certain sense of emotion for a prolonged period of time. Some of the books are, you know, an entire which one? So Blood and Gold, for example, this book, the entire book is a conversation between two people. During that conversation, a story is told. So during the conversation between the two characters, there is a story that is unfolding constantly, and that's what the book is, and that is how it's told to us. But we are reminded that it is a conversation between two characters the entire time. And so we are feeling the narrative, sorry, noisy car, we are feeling, we're really experiencing tales within tales. We're experiencing emotions within emotions. You can have the storyteller meeting a character, sharing their story, feeling a certain emotion towards that story, towards that character, at the same time as diving into their story, and then re-experiencing all of their emotions for the actual story as it initially happened. It's a very interesting way that she writes. I personally feel just a little bit heavier in terms of the pacing for me personally, but it's something I love. Now, if you didn't want to read the entire series, you absolutely don't have to. I would say that the first 3 books are a must, because the first book, Interview with a Vampire, is essentially the story of Louis. It's told from the perspective of Louis. So we get Louis's story. We get Louis's perspective, his story of how he became a vampire, his life with Lestat and with Claudia. That's what this book is. Then, if we have a look at the vampire Lestat, that's Lestat's story. So obviously we learn about Lestat in Interview with the Vampire, but from the perspective of somebody else. And that's very important in this series, is we can learn about characters from their own perspective, and then learn about the same character from someone else's perspective, and things may change. So that's quite important. And then also there's Queen of the Damned, which kind of brings everything together when we learn about the king and queen of the blood drinkers. And I don't want to give too much away, but we learn where everything kind of started, essentially, in a way, and we learn about the wishes of the I'm trying not to say too much. We learn about the wishes of the royalty, of the blood drinkers in modern times, in modern day, and how the modern day can affect things. We hear about this story, the groups of people involved, over such a wide span of time. When we're introduced to our characters in the very first book, and we're looking at it to be pretty modern, we're then introduced to characters that go back thousands of years. So, over the course of all 13 books, we're learning about different characters that are kind of in this gang. We're learning about their lives, which is all throughout different times in history. We're learning about their interactions and their perceptions of the other characters, how people meet, how people came together, how people separate, how people unify at times where they really, really need to, when it's really crucial, and kind of the telling and retelling of events from different perspectives. It's a really interesting story because it doesn't, the way it reads to me is as though there was no guarantee of another book each time, and so it wasn't written leaving something, you know, like, oh, we'll just put that in the next book. It didn't seem to have that guarantee. So each book is a whole experience in and of itself, and because of that, it means you don't necessarily have to read every single book in the series if you didn't want to. I would advise it. If you didn't want to, you don't have to, because you can just pick a book, for example, like I said, Blood and Gold. You can just pick a book and learn all about this character's life, which is Marius, and learn all about his life in this book, although he has been mentioned in previous, and he will mention characters that have been mentioned in previous books and later books, but you'd get enough from this book to fully enjoy it and pretty much, you know, be able to grasp / understand the majority, I feel. One of the characters that gets a lot of attention is the character Armand. And one of the reasons for this is because when he was depicted in the movie Interview with the Vampire, he was played by Antonio Banderas. Now, in the books, Armand is supposed to have been turned into a vampire when he is 17. And so he is supposed to be eternally childlike, essentially. That's a big part of it. It's a big part of his character. There was a build-up for 2 years before he became a vampire of his maker kind of trying to teach him things, to make sure that he would be the most successful he could possibly be in terms of being a vampire, because of the fact that he was so young and he hadn't lived very much. So when it comes to the movies and you've got this grown man, it kind of gives a different impression. I don't think that the casting was terrible in terms of the movies at all with anyone, personally. There are lots of opinions about that. But I do think it gives off a very different impression from what we get from the books. So The Vampire Armand is a very interesting read for those of you that have only ever watched the movies, especially if you really like that character, because you'll learn that it's totally different. He was originally written very different. Again, Blood and Gold touches in large part about his origin story as well. So if you particularly like that character or find that character very interesting, or you have heard people talking and complaining about the fact that the character was cast in a way that made audiences unhappy, those are the books that I would say to read, to understand why. Basically, there was quite a lot of debate in terms of casting. Even Anne Rice herself did not want Tom Cruise to play Lestat. She is to have said that she was pleasantly surprised and did indeed enjoy his performance, but he was not who she would have chosen herself. And I can understand, when I think Lestat in my head, I will be honest, I do always see Tom Cruise. Visually, I'm quite happy with Tom Cruise for Lestat. But when you read the books and you learn a bit more about Lestat as a person, I don't really feel like Tom Cruise's character really hit that nail on the head. That's not to say I don't think he was fantastic in the film, because I think he was, and I think that movie is really very good. It's one of my favourite movies, but I do have to see it completely separate from the books. I have to see it as something that was inspired by the books but not accurate to. Stuart Townsend's Lestat is a lot more bratty, a lot more arrogant, a lot more childish, a lot more naive, and I think that is a lot closer, although he doesn't necessarily look as accurate. I think it is very close, a lot more so than Tom Cruise's Lestat, but I do enjoy both performances. Queen of the Damned did not get good reviews when it came out. People hated that movie. A lot of people still hate that movie. Personally, I think it's fantastic. It's definitely become a cult classic now over time. So the next book I want to highlight, this is one that, again, you wouldn't have to read if you didn't want to. Merrick is the first introduction to the Mayfair Witches in the series. There is a series written by Anne Rice. I believe the series is called The Mayfair Witches. It stars the Mayfair Witches, but I think that's actually the title of the series, that happens completely separate to this, but they are characters that intertwine with this. And Merrick is the first book that really focuses on the introduction of the Mayfair Witches. So if you were somebody that had read the Mayfair Witches and was like, oh, I know that they're in Interview with the Vampire, I know that they're in the Vampire Chronicles, but I don't know at what point they come in or how they interlink. The book Merrick is the first introduction of the Mayfair Witches. There is so many twists and turns, starting and stopping, that happens within this series. And I think something beautiful about this series is, even though we're following a lifetime's or many, many lifetimes worth of documentation from the perspective of vampires who refer to themselves as blood drinkers, what we, like I said, we go along this journey with them of having the most extreme highs, the most extreme lows, that the way that it's written, a mortal could never possibly even begin to grasp what it is to feel emotion, to feel senses of any kind, to taste, to smell, to hear. You know, it really takes you on that imagination train of what it could possibly be like many vampire stories do, I find. But the way that this is written is just so beautiful and so detailed. It really does take you on a very, very encouraging journey in terms of trying to imagine things for yourself. But I think that something it also does very beautifully is incorporates the mistakes in a very human way into the story, in that we have all of these beings that are so much more than mortals now, and yet when they make mistakes, when they do things that they wish they didn't, when they, you know, when they're having a heated moment, when they're having an argument with somebody, they can make these stupid snap judgments just like we can. And so I think that there is still so much to relate to, even though there is so much as a mortal reader that you can't even hope to grasp. There is still so much that makes them seem very human. I think something that I have come to realise in lots of vampire novels and TV programs, movies, different things like that, is that when you have very conscious vampires that are very conscious of being moral beings, that have ethics that they are living by, and that they are, you know, truly trying to be in alignment with their morals, what happens a lot of the time is they're very self-righteous, and they seem very separate entirely from human beings, from mortals, because it's like they're something else entirely, akin to, you know, angels walking around with people, that type of thing. They're just so far removed from the human experience. Whereas I feel the way that Anne Rice has written these characters, they are very much relatable, although we can't possibly understand the intensity and the level of how they feel, their physical senses and their emotional senses, in terms of the mistakes they make, in terms of the judgment calls that they make. We can completely relate to that. And in terms of, you know, the way that they can fall for things, they can fall for lies, they can believe things for centuries before realizing, actually, I don't think that's in my best interest, or, you know, what was I thinking? And I think that that is very special, to have something, to have characters and a journey that seems so far removed from your own experience as a reader, but so utterly relatable at the same time, I think is huge. So if, as I said, you're going to read this for the first time, the first three, so Interview with the Vampire, Queen of the Damned and the Vampire Lestat, are absolute crucial. If you want to also look at the Mayfair Witches, Merrick is the first one, where the Mayfair Witches are introduced. Sorry, just totally forgot what I was saying mid-sentence. And then the Vampire Armand and Blood and Gold is mostly going to give you a big look into the life of the Vampire Armand, who I'm actually not going to say what I was about to say because that could give something away, and I don't want to do that. So I hope that you enjoyed this. There are, as I said, other books within this series that I personally would highly encourage you read, but I think it's rare that a series has been written that you can dip into. Yeah, I think that is quite rare, and I do feel that you can. Others may argue that you can't, but I think you can. And yeah, I hope that you enjoy the video. Bye for now.